Have you ever stopped to observe a dog's gaze when it's scared? It's not anger, it's not aggression, it's pure despair. And that's exactly what people saw that afternoon at the door of an ordinary market in any city. Two small, fragile puppies crying incessantly. But pay attention, they weren't barking, they were crying. You know that difference? That sound that resembles a human lament that breaks the heart of whoever hears it? That's exactly what it was like. People walked by. Some glanced at them, others quickly looked away, as if they didn't want to get involved. The routine continued. Shopping carts, bags, cell phone conversations. And the two of them were there, at the door, as if they were begging for something no one could understand. Have you ever been through this? Have you ever seen a scene like this and been at a loss for what to do, torn between continuing on your way or stopping to help? But there was something very strange about that situation. Why so much desperation? Why were those two dogs there, right at the door of that market, and not somewhere else? They didn't seem to have been abandoned for days. They weren't dirty or malnourished. On the contrary, they seemed to have left home only recently. And then the question arose that no one asked aloud, but that hung in the air. What were they looking for there? The answer, when it finally came to light, shocked everyone, and what seemed to be just another sad story of abandonment revealed itself to be something much deeper, more touching and unexpected. Because you see, those dogs weren't lost. They knew exactly where they were, and they knew exactly what they were doing. Their despair had a name, a face, a reason for existing. Stay with me until the end, because what you're about to discover might surprise you, and perhaps even make you rethink how you view loyalty, unconditional love, and the capacity for feeling that these animals possess. Because while people were going in and out of the market, buying bread, milk, and everyday products, those two small furry creatures were living the most important moment of their lives, and nobody around them had the slightest idea. The scene repeated itself for hours. The crying continued, the anxiety increased, and it was only when someone finally paid attention, really stopped, observed, and tried to understand, that the mystery began to unravel. What seemed like a common situation involving stray dogs took on emotional dimensions, the kind you don't forget, the kind that remind us that often the extraordinary is disguised as the ordinary. And now comes the part that will really hook you on this story. What was happening inside that market? Who was in there making those dogs cry like that? The answer is closer than you think. The answer is closer than you think, but before I tell you what really happened, I need to ask you something. If you're feeling anything while watching this, whether it's emotion, curiosity, or even that tightness in your chest that stories like this provoke, leave a comment below about what has touched you the most so far. Seriously, I want to know. Have you ever experienced something similar? Have you ever seen an animal demonstrating this kind of intense emotion? Your experience matters, and when you share it below, you not only enrich this conversation, but also help other people feel less alone in their own stories.
And look, if you're enjoying this content, if you feel it's worth following, leave a like on the video. It may seem like a small thing, but it's this simple gesture that makes all the difference. It's the like that shows the algorithm that this type of story needs to reach more people, that it has value, that it touches hearts. And if you're not yet subscribed to the channel, this is the perfect time to hit that red button down there. Because here, we don't just bring entertainment, we bring real, moving stories that remind us of what really matters in life. Your participation here is what makes this channel grow and reach more people with this type of content. Every comment, every like, every new subscription is a vote of confidence in what we build together. And I thank you from the bottom of my heart for being here, dedicating your time to this story that is not yet finished. Because now comes the part that will explain everything. That desperate crying, that scene that no one could understand, that anguish that seemed endless, all of it had a reason. And when you discover what was happening inside that market, you'll understand why this story went viral, why it touched millions of people around the world. People passing by started drawing their own conclusions. It's automatic, isn't it? We see a scene like that and our minds immediately start making interpretations. "Oh, they must be hungry," said a woman carrying bags. "More abandoned puppies around here," commented a young man on his cell phone, without even stopping to look properly. "Someone will take care of it later," thought another, quickening his pace as if he didn't want to get involved. And so the story repeated itself. Quick judgment, instant diagnosis, delayed solution. This is a hidden truth that we don't like to admit, but it's part of our journey as human beings. We judge before we understand. We create narratives in our own heads based on what seems obvious, on what we've seen before, on what best fits our routine. And look, it's not malice, it's not a lack of heart, it's just automatic. It's how our mentality works when we're on autopilot, when life is rushing by and we need to keep moving forward. But here's the turning point. None of those people were right. None of those quick conclusions came close to the truth, because those puppies weren't there because they were hungry. They weren't abandoned, and they definitely weren't waiting for someone to solve the problem later. They were experiencing a profound emotional transformation at that very moment, and nobody around them had the slightest idea of the impact that scene had. Have you ever stopped to think about how many times we do this in our own lives? How many decisions do we make based on appearances and not on reality? How many stories do we miss because we don't stop to observe what's happening behind the scenes, to listen to what's being said without words, to feel the urgency that goes beyond the surface? Those two dogs didn't need food. They didn't need temporary shelter. They needed something most people couldn't even imagine looking from the outside. And it was only when someone finally stopped, truly, with presence, with genuine attention, that the real story began to emerge. And that revelation changed everything. It changed how people saw that scene. It changed how they understood the behavior of those animals. And for many people, it even changed how they viewed their own relationship with animals. Because what was happening inside the market wasn't a tragedy. It wasn't abandonment. It was something much more complex, much more touching. And it says a lot about loyalty, about bonding, about the capacity for immeasurable love that these beings possess. Now, I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because when you understand the full context, you'll realize that this story isn't just about two dogs at a market entrance. It's about how we interpret the world, how we respond to the suffering of others, and how sometimes the most important answer is hidden right under our noses. If this makes sense to you, comment below. I also judge too quickly. And it was precisely this closer look that began to reveal something completely out of the ordinary. Because you see, some people tried to help. Someone brought water, another person offered leftover food, those little pieces of bread, a bit of meat, things that any hungry dog would accept immediately, without a second thought. But do you know what happened? They didn't accept it. They simply ignored it. It wasn't disinterest out of politeness or fear. It was as if it made no sense to them at that moment. As if hunger, thirst, tiredness, none of that mattered in the face of what was really happening. And there's more. They wouldn't follow anyone, no matter how much people insisted, called sweetly, or waved food in their hands. The two puppies would look, recognize the good intentions, but wouldn't leave. They always returned to the same spot, always in the same position, always with the same desperate whimper. And that, my friend, was no ordinary behavior. Dogs don't act like that by chance. They don't refuse food when they're lost. They don't ignore help when they're scared. This kind of insistence, this fixation on a specific place, reveals something much deeper. Purpose.
I'll pay attention to this detail because it changes everything. The dogs weren't whining while looking at the street. They weren't barking at passersby. Their focus was directed inside the market, more specifically towards the back of the building. It was as if they were trying to communicate with someone inside, as if they were sending an urgent message that no one outside could understand. This behavior didn't match anything people expected to see, and that's when the story began to take on the contours of a revelation. Because it's one thing to be a lost, disoriented animal seeking any kind of help. It's quite another to be an animal that knows exactly where it is, that has a clear objective, that is making a conscious choice to remain there despite everything. And that difference is huge. It transforms the entire narrative. It transforms a seemingly simple situation into a complex emotional journey, full of layers that we can only see when we stop to truly observe. And do you know what that says about the mindset we carry every day? We're so used to seeking quick answers, to fitting everything into familiar boxes, that when something deviates from the script, we simply don't know how to react. We miss the signs. We ignore the details that don't make sense. And in the process, we also lose the chance to understand the hidden truth that's right there in front of us, screaming to be seen. Those dogs were trying to say something. They were communicating an urgency that went far beyond hunger or fear. And the emotional impact of that message, when it was finally understood, touched everyone who witnessed it. Because it wasn't about abandonment. It wasn't about neglect. It was about something we rarely see in such a pure, intense way. Absolute devotion. And this takes us straight to the behind the scenes of this story, to the part that no one imagined when they saw those two little ones crying at the door. Write in the comments, true loyalty. And while all this was happening outside, life went on normally inside. Think about it. Inside that market, there was music playing in the background, people chatting, shopping carts moving through the aisles, cash registers beeping with each completed purchase. It was the usual rhythm of any given day, that constant buzz that we don't even pay attention to when we're immersed in it. People were choosing products, comparing prices, deciding between one brand and another. Simple automatic decisions, part of anyone's routine. But outside, separated only by a glass door and a few meters away, those two dogs lived a completely opposite reality. Emotional silence, pure despair. A cry that cut through the air but somehow couldn't cross the invisible barrier between the two worlds. It's as if there were a clear division. Inside, normality. Outside, urgency. And nobody seemed to notice the stark contrast between these two realities happening at the same time, in the same place. Time passed. Minutes that meant nothing to those shopping. Just a few more items in the cart, just one more line to pay. But for those two little beings, each minute was an eternity. Each second of waiting increased the anxiety, intensified the crying, reinforced that desperate feeling that something very important was happening, and no one understood. And you know what's most impressive about all this? The emotional impact that this contrast reveals about how we live. We're so used to functioning within our own bubble at our own pace that we often don't notice what's literally happening on the other side of the door. It's not out of malice, it's not out of a lack of empathy. It's because our mindset is programmed to focus on what's immediate, on what's part of our personal journey at that moment. And in the process, we end up creating this involuntary silence around the urgent needs of others. That silence was costly. Every minute of misunderstanding, every moment of disconnection between what was happening outside and inside the market was a piece of suffering that could have been avoided. Not with grand gestures, not with complex solutions, but simply with attention, with presence, with the transformation of perspective that happens when we truly stop and ask, what is happening here that I am not seeing? And then comes a hidden truth that runs through this whole story. Sometimes the answer we seek, the solution we search for, the understanding we lack, is separated from us only by a thin layer of distraction, by a transparent glass that we insist on not crossing, by a door that we could open but choose not to open because we are too busy with our own to-do list. Those dogs weren't being ignored out of cruelty. They were being ignored because no one had stopped long enough to question their own interpretation of the scene. No one had asked the right question. No one had gone beyond the surface. And that's a lesson that goes far beyond the specific story. It speaks to how we relate to the world, to others, and even to our own feelings, which we often sweep under the rug because now is not the time. But what if that's exactly the right moment? What if that crying, that insistence, that refusal to leave was the clearest possible sign that something bigger was at stake, something that demanded not only attention, but immediate action? And it was precisely at that moment, when it seemed like the story would drag on indefinitely in this cycle of misunderstanding, that someone finally broke the pattern. It wasn't a hero. It wasn't someone prepared for this. It was just an ordinary person who, on that day, made the decision to look twice, to question their own first impression, to not accept the easiest interpretation and move forward. He was a customer at the market, someone who had probably walked through that door dozens of times, who knew the way like the back of his hand, who was there just to do his shopping for the day and go home. But something about that crying caught his attention in a different way. Maybe it was the intensity, maybe it was the persistence, or maybe it was simply that rare moment when we are minimally available to notice what is happening around us, even when it's not part of our routine.
This person stopped, and it wasn't a quick pause, like someone glancing at something and drawing a conclusion. It was a real pause. They observed the dogs. They saw that they weren't thin. They noticed that they weren't chasing after anyone offering food. They observed that they always returned to the same spot, as if they had a specific objective, a clear mission that no one else could see. And that's when the transformation began to happen. Not in the situation itself, but in the way they looked at it. "Why do you know what this person did that no one else had done?" she asked, not to herself, but to other people around her. "Does anyone know whose dogs these are? How long have they been here? Did anyone see anything different?" And these simple questions, asked at the right moment, began to piece together a puzzle that until then had been completely disordered. Each answer brought a new piece of information, a small revelation that, when put together with the others, began to form a much clearer and more touching picture of what was really happening. That's the power of looking twice, of not accepting the first narrative our minds create,
of going behind the scenes of the story before filing it away as just another sad but common situation. Because the truth is that most of the deep, moving, transformative stories we live or witness aren't on the surface. They're hidden beneath layers of automatic interpretation, quick judgment, and ready-made solutions that we apply without thinking. And when that person started putting the pieces together, when other people around started participating in this impromptu investigation, a hidden truth began to emerge. It wasn't hunger. It wasn't abandonment. It wasn't fear of being alone. It was something that touched on a much deeper dimension of the emotional experience these animals are capable of having. It was about bonding. It was about recognition. It was about the capacity to miss someone, to wait, to refuse to give up even when everything around seems to indicate that it would be easier to simply leave. And the impact of this discovery was immediate, because suddenly that scene ceased to be just a few more dogs in the street and transformed into something much bigger, a mirror of our own capacity to love, to become attached, to be loyal to those who matter to us. And this change of perspective, this turning point in the collective mentality of the people who were there, is what transformed this story into a message that needed to be shared. And it was at that moment, when attention was finally truly focused on them, that the puppies did something no one expected. They began to move, not randomly, not running in any direction. They took a few deliberate steps towards the back of the market, that area that most customers don't even know about, where the storage areas, the service aisles, the hidden parts of the establishment that aren't part of the shopping experience are located. And then they stopped. They turned their heads back. They looked directly at the person who had stopped to watch them, and they waited, as if they were saying without words, without barking, only with their bodies and their eyes, "Come, you need to come with me. You need to see what's happening here." It was such clear, intentional communication that it was impossible not to understand the message. They weren't lost. They were trying to guide someone somewhere. When the person didn't move immediately, they turned back. They repeated the movement. They walked again in the same direction, stopped, looked back, waited. They persisted. And this persistence wasn't stubbornness. It was pure desperation translated into action. It was animal instinct functioning at its most sophisticated level, recognizing that alone they couldn't solve what needed to be solved, but that perhaps, just perhaps, a human being could.
And here is one of the most beautiful and painful revelations of this story. These animals trusted. Even after being ignored for so long, even after so many people passed by without understanding, they didn't give up on the possibility that someone would finally be able to make the connection. They believed that if they could get attention in the right way, if they could communicate clearly enough, someone would come, someone would understand, someone would help. And do you know what this says about the emotional journey these beings go through? About the capacity for hope that exists even in situations of absolute despair? It shows that behind that crying, that insistence, that refusal to leave that specific place, there was a clear purpose. There was intelligence, there was strategy, and above all, there was unconditional love driving every decision, every movement, every attempt to ask for help. Because they knew they couldn't solve it alone. They knew they needed human help. And instead of giving up, instead of surrendering to paralyzing despair, they chose to act. They chose to try in every way possible to make someone understand the urgency of that moment. And that choice, that refusal to give up, is the kind of behavioral transformation that we rarely stop to recognize in animals. But it's right there, screaming, begging to be seen. When the person finally started following the puppies, when they made the decision to trust that nonverbal communication and let themselves be guided by two small furry beings who seemed to know exactly what they were doing, the story took on a new rhythm. The anxiety that was in the air transformed into action. The constant crying began to mix with a new energy, almost as if the dogs were saying, "Finally, finally someone understood." And each step taken towards the back of the market was a step closer to the truth that was hidden there. They knew all along. And when they finally reached the back of the market, when they crossed that area that most people never see, what was waiting there changed everything. It changed how everyone would understand that scene. It changed the meaning of that crying. It definitely changed the whole story.
Because there, in a less lit corner, in a service area far from the eyes of customers, was a person lying on the floor, conscious but clearly in trouble. Someone who had fallen ill and who for some reason couldn't ask for help. Maybe I didn't have the strength to scream. Maybe he was in shock. Maybe there simply wasn't anyone around to hear. And do you know who that person was? The puppy's owner. The person they loved more than anything in the world. The reason they had refused food, ignored offers of help, insisted on staying in that specific spot. They weren't lost. They were trying to save someone. And every passing second, every minute of misunderstanding outside was a critical minute for the person inside, alone, needing immediate help. The impact of this revelation is difficult to put into words, because suddenly everything made sense. The desperate crying wasn't fear or abandonment, it was real urgency. The refusal to leave wasn't stubbornness, it was unwavering loyalty. The insistence on looking at the back of the building wasn't random behavior, it was direct communication, trying to say what couldn't be said with words. My human needs help. Please, someone come. Please, someone understand. And here is the hidden truth that runs through this whole story and forces us to rethink everything we think we know about these animals. They weren't just reacting on instinct. They were making strategic decisions. They were assessing the situation, recognizing their own limitations, and actively seeking a solution that involved asking humans for help. This is not simple behavior. This is emotional intelligence at work on levels we rarely stop to acknowledge. Think about what would have happened if no one had stopped, if no one had looked twice, if the person who finally paid attention had simply walked past like everyone else, quickly judging them to be just another abandoned dog. Time was critical. The person in the back had been without assistance for quite some time. Every minute mattered, and the puppies knew it. They sensed the urgency, and instead of panicking and becoming paralyzed, they acted. They did everything in their power to resolve a situation that was completely out of their control. This is the part that really gets to us. This is the shift in perspective that this story provokes. We underestimate these beings too much. We put them in a limited box of they react on instinct, they don't think, they don't plan, they don't feel in a complex way. But this story proves the opposite. It shows that when someone they love is in danger, they don't just feel, they act. They develop strategies, they persist, they refuse to give up even when all seems lost.
And the most touching thing of all, they trusted. Against all evidence that no one understood, they continued to believe that someone would eventually make the right connection. And from that moment on, everything changed at breakneck speed. The person who had followed the puppies immediately yelled for help. Market employees came running. Someone grabbed their cell phone and called emergency services. The words tumbled out, trying to explain the situation as quickly as possible. There's someone collapsed back here. It looks serious. They need an ambulance now. And while the call was being made, other people were already around, trying to assess the person's condition, offering water, asking if they could speak, if they could move. The puppies, who until then had been in a constant state of despair, completely changed their energy. They didn't stop whimpering, but now it was different. It was as if they were saying, "Yes, that's it. That's exactly what needed to happen." They stayed there, clinging to their owner, licking his face, pressing their bodies against him, doing everything they could to convey that they were there, that they hadn't abandoned him, that they would never abandon him. And this scene, this pure and unconditional devotion happening in real time, touched everyone present in a way that is difficult to describe. Because at the same time as all this urgency, this race against time to ensure that medical help arrived quickly, the people around began to process what had really happened. And then came that heavy feeling, that pang of collective guilt. We passed by them. We saw and didn't understand. If I had stopped sooner, if someone had really paid attention from the beginning. They were loose phrases, said in a low voice, but they carried the weight of a painful revelation about how we live, about how we judge, about how we decide what deserves our attention and what doesn't. And that's one of the most impactful lessons from this whole story. We make mistakes. We fail. We miss important signs because we're operating on autopilot, because we're too used to interpreting the world through pre-established patterns, because we simply don't take enough time to question whether what seems obvious really is. And when the truth finally comes out, when the behind-the-scenes events are revealed, we realize how much time was wasted,
How much urgency was ignored? How much suffering could have been alleviated if only someone had looked more carefully? But here too comes the relief, because despite all the lost time, despite all the misunderstanding, help arrived. The ambulance was called. The person was no longer alone. And this happened because someone at some point made the right decision. You made the choice to look beyond the surface, to trust the desperate communication of those two little dogs who knew all along exactly what was happening and what needed to be done. This mix of tension and relief, of guilt and gratitude, of belated recognition and finally effective action is what makes this story so powerful. Because it's not just about animal loyalty. It's about our own journey as human beings, trying to navigate a complex world, full of signs we don't know how to interpret, full of urgencies we can't see until it's almost too late. And now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because this story goes far beyond what happened on that specific day. It teaches us something fundamental about the nature of these animals that we live with, that we love, but that we often don't fully understand. Because think about it, those little dogs don't speak our language. They can't pick up a phone and call for rescue. They can't articulate in words what's wrong, where it hurts, what needs to be done. And yet, even with all these limitations, they saved a life. This wasn't luck. It wasn't a coincidence. It was pure intelligence translated into action. It was the ability to assess a complex situation and find a solution within the tools they had available. And you know what's most impressive? They didn't just recognize the danger. They understood that they needed outside help. They understood that they couldn't solve it alone, but that if they could get the attention of the right people in the right way, someone would come. This level of reasoning, this type of strategic decision-making in a moment of crisis, reveals an emotional and cognitive depth that we rarely attribute to them.
And here's a truth that runs through the entire niche of animal behavior, the bond between humans and pets, protection and loyalty. There's something in them that goes beyond what science can easily measure. There's a protective instinct so strong, so ingrained, that when someone they love is in danger, they simply can't stand still. They don't weigh pros and cons. They don't calculate whether the effort is worthwhile. They just act with everything they have, using all available resources until the person is safe. And that's a profound lesson for us too, because how many times do we give up on something important because it seems too difficult? How many times do we look at a complicated situation and think, I don't have the right tools, I don't know how to solve it, so it's better not to even try? These puppies didn't have the right tools. They couldn't talk. They didn't know how to use a phone. They didn't know how to open doors or seek help in a conventional way. But they had determination. They had love. They had the absolute refusal to give up on the person who mattered most to them, and that was enough. They transformed limitation into creativity. They used what they had, crying, movement, persistence, the ability to guide, and built a communication strategy that eventually worked. And this transformation of a seemingly hopeless situation into a successful rescue story is what makes this case so powerful, because it shows that sometimes the solution isn't in having all the perfect tools. It's in using what you have with such conviction, with such clarity of purpose, that eventually someone will understand. And this forces us to rethink how we view these animals in our daily lives. They are not just pets that depend on us for everything. They are beings capable of making complex decisions, of protecting those they love, of acting with courage even when they are scared. And the impact of this revelation on our collective mindset about what it means to have a pet at home, about the responsibility that comes with it, about the bond that exists between such different species, is immense. They are silent heroes. And do you know what message this whole story leaves us with? That sometimes the cry for help comes from where we least expect it. It comes without words. It comes in the form of persistent crying. It comes through glances that we need to learn to interpret. It comes from beings we tend to underestimate, whom we place in a position of absolute dependence, but who are capable of saving us as much as we save them. And recognizing this, accepting this truth, completely changes the way we relate to the world around us. Because this shift in perspective doesn't just happen with animals, it extends to all areas of our lives. How many times do we ignore signs that someone close to us needs help because they didn't ask for it in the way we expected? How many times do we miss opportunities to make a difference because the request wasn't packaged in the conventional way. How many times do we judge a situation by its surface and completely miss what's happening behind the scenes, where the real urgency is screaming to be seen?
This story about the puppies at the market is a mirror. It reflects back to us our own limitations, our own communication failures, our own difficulty in getting out of autopilot and really paying attention to what is being said without words. And the impact of this on our personal journey, on how we make decisions every day, on how we choose to spend our attention and energy is profound. Because when we learn to look twice, when we develop this ability to question the first interpretation and go deeper, we not only help others, we transform ourselves as well. And if there's one thing I want you to take away from this story, it's precisely this. Don't ignore the signs. Don't dismiss what seems small or irrelevant just because it doesn't fit the pattern you're used to. Don't underestimate communication that comes in different forms, that demands more attention, that asks you to stop and really observe. Because sometimes, behind what seems simple, there is a real urgency. There is a life that can be saved. There is a huge difference waiting to be made. And look, if this story touched you in any way, if you felt that tightness in your chest, if you recognized something in yourself in this narrative, I want to ask you one thing. Leave a like on this video, because that's how we show the algorithm, the platforms, the world, that this type of content matters, that real, touching stories that make us reflect on who we are and how we live deserve to be seen by more people. And if you can share this with someone you think needs to hear this message, who needs this reflection, do it. Because the more people learn not to ignore signs, to look more carefully, to question their own automatic conclusions, the better the world becomes for everyone. And if you're not yet subscribed to this channel, now is the perfect time. Hit that subscribe button, because here we bring you real stories that awaken the most human side of us, stories that remind us of what really matters, stories that transform the way we see the world and our place in it.